I know it's a.
That's a fascinating question. It's kind of an interesting story, or at least to me it was, because if you would have asked me 10 years ago what I'd be doing today, it's not this. I grew up in a small town in the Texas Panhandle, and we were a family of very, very modest means. There were a few nights that we went to bed hungry, and I think that helped shape me pretty well. After I graduated from high school, went to Texas A&M. I paid my own way through school, and then I came out as an accountant and a CPA. Ultimately started working in the energy business. Spent 30 years in the energy business. My ultimate job was as CEO of an oil and gas company that I helped co-found. And in June of 2009, the House passed a really bad piece of legislation. And it upset me, so I said, somebody needs to go change this, and ultimately it was me that decided to run for Congress. And so 6 months later, in December 2009, I decided to run for Congress and ultimately beat a 20-year incumbent, and here I am today. So I'm at my 5th term, and still working hard for the folks here in the Brazos Valley and in Central Texas. Well, the first thing is my faith. The second thing is, if you look at our structure as a government, we believe that our rights as people come from God, and that we as the people give certain limited powers and authorities to our government, to the federal government. And though, to me, that preserves the things that we find important: liberty, basically the right to pursue happiness, have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so those things, those are the conservative principles I live by. I think that government ought to have a light touch on people's lives, because ultimately the government works for the people instead of the way some people think it should work today, that the people should work for the government. Well, Jack Kemp, of course, was a great leader. Before we get into Congress, folks, the ultimate leader I found in terms of modern day political life is Ronald Reagan. And he always believed in the inherent goodness of the American people, and that the federal government ought to be limited in its powers. And so I've always considered myself to be a Ronald Reagan Republican. In terms of more current congressional leaders, Phil Gramm, in my view, is a rock star, and he was a mentor to me in our campaign. The other person who was a mentor, actually, when I was a freshman in Congress, was Vice President Mike Pence. He was a congressman, and he was the chair of the Republican Study Committee, and I ultimately got to serve in that role a couple of terms after he moved on. So he was one. Newt Gingrich, Newt has both good characteristics and bad, because, he was a really bold leader that set up the contract with America. But now he's got like a million ideas, and you kind of have to filter it out to get to the core ideas. So, but still, at the end of the day, he was able to do things with the Congress that were pretty amazing, particularly when you had a non-Republican in the White House. This is going to sound like an odd answer, but Paul Ryan was a great leader for the House. We got a lot of things done. We had what we called the Better Way agenda in 2016, and that had tax reform and regulatory reform and all the things that were part of the Trump agenda. And so Paul helped us guide a lot of those through. Now, some of them didn't work. I mean, some of the things like healthcare reform, we weren't able to get to it. And that was mostly because of divisions on the Republican side and no support from the Democrats. But those are the folks that I consider to be some of the best leaders. Again, Phil Gramm, Mike Pence, Newt Gingrich, and Paul Ryan. Number one is, you hear a lot of agitation, if you will, about climate change. The United States of America and the American people have done more to reduce emissions than any other industrialized country on this earth. And we have, of the industrialized countries in the world that have more than 40 million people in population, we have the cleanest environment of all. People don't realize that. So we've done great things. So in terms of thinking that we've got to have a Green New Deal or something like that, that would kill us economically and kill opportunity for young people. So number one, what we've been able to do on emissions. Number two is we've been able to do that while becoming the largest producer of oil and natural gas in the entire world. That's remarkable, from where we went as a net importer to the point where we're the world's largest producer. It's really amazing. It was American ingenuity and know-how that caused that to happen. The other thing that people need to realize is that if you want to get all your energy from renewable sources like wind and solar, there are some costs to that the American people need to be aware of. Number one is you can't make it work unless you have some sort of storage. Storage involves using something like lithium batteries. Lithium batteries are really, really bad for the environment. Also, in order to make lithium batteries, you have to have cobalt. Cobalt comes from child slavery or child labor countries and countries that use slave labor. So there's a social cost to it. There's an environmental cost. So if we're going to do something, I mean, if we really want to have zero emissions energy, we need to go nuclear. That's the way to go because it's always on. It's on when the sun's shining. It's on when the sun's not. It's on when the wind's blowing, and it has zero emissions. So that's something the American people need to think about. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we need to have a thoughtful, science-based approach that's based on all the above energy sources because we've got great resources in this country and we know how to use them and know how to use them cleanly. Well, the Flores family is one of the first few families to settle in Texas. We came from Spain in 1725 and settled around Nacogdoches and have been part of Texas history ever since. So if you look at Texas history, I mean, the Hispanic population has always been a huge part of it, and even today it's a huge part of the future for the leadership of this state. I'm proud to be a ninth generation Texan, and
I'm sorry.
I mean part of that. Sorry. You're going to have all kinds of editing to do. All righty, let's see what's going on here. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Hey, did you call again? Tell them it's in the northeast corner of the front yard. It's that big green thing that says Cape Suddenlink on it. Yeah, it's up by the road, near the storm sewer.
Okay, so it's, oh, I see.
Suddenly, folks are so, never mind, I'm not going to do this because that camera's probably rolling. So anyway, I'm proud to be a ninth generation Texan, ninth generation Texas Hispanic. Well, it's unfortunate today that everybody's in identity politics. Look, we're all Americans. I'm an American first. I'm a Texan, you know, and my heritage is important to me, but it's not the thing that drives me. What drives me is what does it take for America to be successful? All of us, irrespective of color, background, or origin, whatever. We ought to be focused on being Americans first. Here, those of us in Texas ought to be focused on being good Texans and what it takes to make this state move forward in this nation. And so, irrespective of color, and I hate it when people spend all their time trying to say, okay, we've got to go get this group or this group. Why don't we get everybody? You know, we as conservatives believe in opportunity and individual liberty and limited government. And those are the things that help everybody succeed and thrive, and that's what we ought to be focused on. Well, I was offended that happened in our state. I'm offended it happened in our country. I don't know what's happening in some people's minds to cause them to somehow get agitated or actualized to the point that they pick up a weapon and go inflict violence on somebody else. And we need to focus on those things. We need to, I don't think we need to focus so much on whether it's, white nationalism or something like that. We got to figure out what's going on in the minds of people that would pick up something and hurt somebody else. We've got some mental challenges that some populations have. There are things in our society and our family structures that are causing these types of incidents to happen. And that's where we need to spend our time and attention because so far the argument's been on guns and on, white supremacy and things like that. But I think the issue is much, much more basic. The issue is what's going on in the minds of people today that would cause them to do something like that. We obviously have a breakdown somewhere. That's where we need to focus our attention. Well, several things. If you want to look at the big, hairy issues, we need to get our deficit under control and our national debt. That is a huge challenge. It is something that's going to take a little bit of time, and it's going to take something that requires bipartisan support. This is something where Democrats and Republicans and everybody else need to hold hands and do it together, because it's the right thing to do. Because every day of inaction dealing with our federal debt is just another day closer to crisis for all generations. And I mean, the folks that are currently on benefits like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, they're going to get hurt. The younger generations who are having to pay for the inaction today are going to get hurt by weaker economic opportunities in the future. So that's the big thing I'd like to look at. And these can all be fixed. They're all solvable, but you can't use the fixes as political tools to try to bash another party. And that's unfortunately what I see today, is that one party's trying to bash the other. And whenever somebody mentions the word about trying to reform some of these programs so that they're sustainable. In terms of near-term goals, again, back to my theme about energy, if we really want to have zero emissions energy, we need to have a robust nuclear power generation footprint, but not using today's generation of nuclear reactors. I'm talking about using next generation nuclear power, which includes small modular reactors, advanced nuclear reactors, things like that. We need to fix that ecosystem. So we've got to figure out, how do we get the basic research dollars in place to make that technology work? How do you deal with the waste? If they require a different kind of fuel, we need to be sure that you got the fuel supply coming in, and then make sure that the whole licensing structure is put together so that you can get these things built and online. They're inherently safer than what we have today. And so get the licensing and regulatory ecosystem to fit that. And we will be the world, we can be the world leader in this if we want to be. From the nuclear energy solution, that's something that's really could be done in terms of getting the statutory ecosystem fixed. That can be done in a year. And it's something that has bipartisan support. I mean, you do have some naysayers on both sides that don't like nuclear, but there's a core of us, both Republicans and Democrats, that look at, if you really want to have zero emissions, the way it goes, and you really want your lights to be on all the time, and you don't want to deal with the challenges of battery storage and all that, then nuclear is the way to go. And I think that Republicans and Democrats can work together on this. Look, I went out to Yucca Mountain 2 weeks ago on a bipartisan trip, and all but one of us, there was one holdout Democrat that didn't like nuclear power. The rest of us did, and so I think we can find a way to work forward on this. So now, in terms of the actual implementation of that kind of a power structure, that's something that will take 2 or 3 decades. But that's what we ought to do. We ought to be talking about a 50-year moonshot approach to trying to find a way to reduce our carbon footprint. At the same time, have a robust economy and not hurt the economy and hurt opportunity for younger generations while we're doing this. Oh my gosh, Texas District 17 is blessed with some great constituents. So I think of one of my mentors here in Bryan College Station is a gentleman named Bookman Peters. He was a banker. He's been a community leader, a community philanthropist. He's the epitome of what it means to be a good servant, selfless servant leader. And so Bookman Peters is one of those types of people. My pastor, Chris Osborne, over at Central Baptist Church, is another one. Jimmy Siebert, who is the founder and pastor of Antioch Church in Waco, is another great constituent. A lot of people don't realize Chip and Joanna Gaines from Fixer Upper are constituents, and you think about the way they were able to lead a solid conservative Christian life when they were doing the Fixer Upper show on HGTV. They create a great example. And another one that people don't realize is a constituent, Abby Johnson. You remember the story of Abby Johnson? There was a movie called Unplanned that came out. People need to go see that. But Abby Johnson worked at the local Planned Parenthood here in Bryan College Station, and ultimately figured out that what she was doing was wrong, that abortion was wrong. And so she became a huge pro-life advocate after she saw what was happening at Planned Parenthood. And that Planned Parenthood is now closed in this community, and thousands of babies have been saved. And she is now a leading voice actually around the world for the protection of unborn life. And then we've got some other people who've done some really amazing things in this district. Susan Peters lives in Waco. She became concerned about human trafficking and started a group called Unbound that now has chapters throughout the state and through around the country, and also starting in other international areas. And so this just came for her passion to make sure that human trafficking was wiped out. And so we've got lots of people like that are great constituents. So I just can't narrow it down to just one. And I'm sure I left out 2,000 or 3,000 others, but we have great constituents in this district.